Woohoo.
All right, everyone, we are live. How's it going? Thanks for joining us. My name is Colin Brooks, and I am a member of the Phys Pedagogy team and the Phys Ed Summit team. And hey, it's been an awesome day. You stoked your fire all day, and you're doing it's just amazing. And we're very humbled that you want to be a part of a conference that lasts 24 hours in a row. And it's amazing. It's an amazing thing to be a part of. So just a few things that I remind you of. So if you're having trouble viewing the presentation, my first suggestion for you is to refresh your Tozzle browser, all right? And if that's not working out for you, please just write me in the message within the Tozzle that you're having issues, and I'll help you as well as I can. Also, if you're using the web browser Internet Explorer, you may have some issues, so I definitely suggest that you look at a web browser as Chrome or maybe Safari, but Chrome definitely works the best with what we're doing today. So just a few technical reminders about that with the technology, and if something goes wrong on our end, we'll take care of it as fast as we can, and I'll relay information to you on that Tozzle as we get started. So just a reminder also that we will have a conference feedback form that we'd love for you to fill out, and when you fill out that conference feedback form, you can receive your certificate of participation. So I'll be putting that feedback form in the Tozzle as well. You just need to fill it out once for the whole conference, though. So enough of me blabbing on. Without further ado, I'd like to just introduce our presenters for tonight or today's topic, wherever you are in the world. So I'm going to hand it over to Mel, and Mel, you can take it away.
Cheers, mate. Hello, everyone. I'm Mel Hamada, and I'm currently working in the middle school at the International School of Beijing. I presented yesterday with my good friend Adam at home, and we cut in and out of Google because, as you might know, Google's not a favorite here in China. So I risked it and come to work on a Sunday, and you can see my office. It's probably not as spiffy as your office is. And hopefully you can see I'm wearing a pink shirt that I've stolen from one of my co-workers to be all ready for our support of breast cancer and women's cancer. I'm very, very excited to present tonight, or today. It's actually 11 o'clock in Sunday here. And I'm super excited to present with Rick Baldock, who is a hero of mine, who works tirelessly to make sure that professional development is absolutely amazing and in-depth and current in Australia. So Rick, take it away. Tell us about you.
Hi, Mel. Hi, everyone. As Mel said, I'm Rick Baldock, and I live in South Australia, so in a central state but down south. It's about 12:30 here in the afternoon, early afternoon, and it's coolish but warm for the end of winter here. It's my pleasure actually to be working with Mel because she's such a great reflective practitioner, and it's really good to combine with her because having that voice of a practitioner who's very current and worked in a whole range of schools is really useful for me. For those of you who are international, please excuse my extraordinarily strange accent. I can't hear it, but I suppose you can. All right, let's make a start here. So we're going to look at student voice, participation and leadership in schools.
So guys, if you want to follow on with our presentation, there in the Tozzle there's a link to the notes. I can see some people have already popped up, which is awesome. If you want to pop into our presentation, there's a couple of things that you can add to as we go along. Sorry,
yeah.
Rick.
No, not at all. So I suppose our first slide is around, feel free to join part of the discussion, get involved, and and Colin's going to tell us if there are questions, and we'll try and respond to those as we go, so we can make it as highly interactive as possible.
Yep, all and right. This slide is also the Phys Ed slide. It's Phys Ed people who make all this happen. They work tirelessly, volunteering to help us all out. So thank you so much for enabling Rick and I to share with you guys.
Yeah, thanks Colin and Co.
You are so welcome.
Thanks, mate. So a little bit about us and who we are and where we work. Mel, do you want to just talk about your work now in Beijing?
Yeah, just quickly, I've been teaching overseas. I'm originally from Australia. My accent is deteriorating as I stay away from Australia. It's actually much stronger when I'm in residence, I think. I have worked in several international schools, mostly teaching the middle years program, which is the IB grade 6 to 10 curriculum. This is my first year to step out of that, actually, and where I'm teaching at ISB, and the department here follows the Ontario curriculum standards. It's still very inquiry based, but it's a little different, and I'm still exploring how I'm going to undo some of those really set things in my teaching, and explore taking the best of my practice and then developing it further here. So I'm very excited about that. At the moment I'm teaching grades 6, 7 and 8. And I'm in a much bigger school here, so I'm pretty excited about what's happening. You can find me at Twitter, Voxer, or I'm also pretty active on my blog, although having just moved to Beijing a month ago, probably not as active as I used to be.
Okay, thanks, Mel. For me, I'm an old bloke, so I've been around a while and done a few things from teaching classroom in primary schools through to phys ed specialist. I've worked in our local Department of Education in the area of health and physical education. I've also worked overseas with a group from ACHPA, the Australian Council of Health, Phys Ed and Recreation, where we wrote curriculum in the Middle East, in the Gulf state of Qatar. That was about 8 years ago. But that was a pretty formative experience for me. Now I basically retired from our education department, and I'm working a couple of days a week for ACHPA in South Australia, and also doing some casual lecturing and workshops at Flinders University here in Adelaide. All right,
Nice.
let's move on. So, where is everybody? You can see where we are, where Mel is, and how far away we are from each other. I'm the one in Australia, and she's the one up there in China. I think the idea, Mel, is for people to just
So there's
drag
lots
their
of blue flags on the side. If you can pick up a flag and put it in the region of the world that you're in, just be careful that you don't move everything around as you go along. But we'd love to see where everybody is and get an idea of the kind of geography we're dealing with tonight. So please go ahead and take a blue flag and move it if you're in and sharing with us. Awesome.
So there are some moving, Mel.
Yeah.
Good.
So far I've got lots on the America side of things. It doesn't look like many Aussies or Chinese are going to tune in with us, Rick.
Ah, okay. Well, they're most probably sick of hearing me, the Aussies, so that's all right.
All right, mate, let's move on.
Okay.
People can come back and keep going there.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. All right, so what we wanted to look at today is try and understand, what the importance of student voice is in our schools and our classes. To have a quick look at the three big PE models that I think are informing professional or PE, contemporary PE, and how we can be most efficient there in working with our students. We want to go in depth and have a look at one of those models, Hellison's model of teaching personal and social responsibility, and then consider how you could best implement TPSR in your teaching practice. And when I say TPSR, I mean teaching personal and social responsibility. Okay, so that's what we're hopeful we'll be able to get out of this session. So, I suppose the big question here is what learning needs to take place, what competencies or skills do the kids that you work with have to develop to successfully take action in their lives. So this one's over to you, and what do you think?
So if you are watching, we would love for you to participate in the Tozzle chat. If you go back to the Tozzle chat and then send a message, Colin will be able to share with us. Sadly, I can't, the chat's not coming up for me, but I know Rick and Colin can see it. So please send us some answers. What is it that you think your students need to be successful and take action in their lives? Colin, is there anything coming up there?
So far, no answer to the questions, just some more people tuning in so far.
No
So
worries.
they may need to, yeah, they may need to see the question displayed there just a little bit longer.
I'm going to try and answer, see if it comes to Colin.
Okay, we have one, positive role models.
Nice.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. What about
Problem.
you, Rick? What's the one takeaway that you see happening when you go into classrooms and help with teachers these days?
I reckon one of the big things is that students feel that they have the power to be able to do these things. Um, because I think sometimes schools have been traditionally environments that have been run by teachers, um, and and sometimes students at all levels of schooling are consistently waiting for the teacher to lead, um, and um, and I just think that's the way we've been set up traditionally. So
Right.
that's a big one for me. What about you, Mel?
Yeah, I agree. I think along the way I've noticed, and especially being in a new school, I think you're very observant when you move
Hmm.
location. I think teachers really want to be involved. I think we are the success stories of schools. We are the ones that feel that we have been being empowered and we have leadership and we want to give back to our environment. And I think we come out of school really empowered by that, and we go back in and we want the best for our kids, but sometimes we do it all for them rather than realizing that they need to fail along the way and build resilience and collaborate to be successful.
You know,
Yeah.
there's been quite a few people participating now, so I'll just kind of go
Okay.
through them and read them off to you if that sounds good.
Yeah.
So,
Good.
so besides or problem solving, we have conflict resolution, thinking outside of the box. We have teamwork skills, um, safe environment. Sorry,
Hmm.
let's see, safe environment and confidence, communication, cooperative learning, cooperation skills, collaboration, self-esteem and confidence, peer collaboration, and dealing with differences, comparisons, and inclusion. So quite a few good answers there.
Really good ones.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that, folks. That's I reckon that's a great list. I suppose some of the work that I've bumped into, there's a gentleman in Denmark called Bjarne Jensen, and he works in health education and also in environmental education. And what he's suggested is that a lot of students don't just catch these skills or these abilities. Um, and he's suggested a more explicit approach to developing student competencies to take action in their own lives. And when I first heard this stuff, I suppose I reflected on my life and thought, where did I learn this stuff? And I think I learned it on the job once I left school. Um, and he uses a mnemonic to describe this, and he calls it IVAC. So these action competencies are best described by IVAC, and the I stands for investigate, the V for vision, the A for action, and the C for change. Now, I think in schools, what we're really good at doing or we're the best of those four that we do, is teach kids how to investigate something,
Mm.
right? And I think that's where a lot of our focus is. How do you investigate stuff? But in terms of taking action and bringing about change, we don't actually explicitly often teach that stuff. Um, and I'm wondering how students best get that stuff. I'm left wondering, like after we've investigated something, how do we magically then envision what possible futures could be? Then how do we know what actions are most likely to work so that we can actually bring about the change? And when we bring about the change, we're left wondering, well, how effective is that change? And do I need to reinvestigate? Do I need to start, if you like, that cycle again? So part of the issue too is that um, where we position childhood and children. And when I'm talking about children, I mean anybody under 18 years of age, because that's an international definition. And I really like some of the work of Prout here, because he, in his writings out of Scotland and the UK, he argues that quite often the public dialogue, what you see in the media, what you hear politicians talking about, positions children as in danger. So we know all about the child protection issues and the safety of children, and we hear that a lot. And then the other polarization we hear about is children as dangerous. And I suppose, you know, an illustration of that in Australia would be what we call hoon drivers, people that get in their cars, young people who drive really quickly and are endangering others and themselves. So that's quite often how the media positions that public dialogue about children. They're either in danger or they're dangerous. Whereas the fact is that the vast majority of children fall somewhere in between those two poles. And I think sometimes the polarization and the positioning of childhood doesn't help us. It just sort of provides those extremes, and we're not clear about how we should be treating children. So Prout goes on to suggest that he thinks the best way to look at children and young people is to focus on the possibility of children as citizens, and that we start to think about children and their citizenship and their participation in our society. Because when you think more broadly about it, that's to me, one of the prime functions of schooling. It isn't just about what we hear a lot in the media about reading, writing and arithmetic, the 3 R's, but it's also about how can we have a better society, how can people take up those roles of citizenship within our society. So childhood has tended to be positioned a lot through notions of seeing children as dependent, vulnerable, malleable, and you hear quite consistently, especially in early childhood, that by investing in education early, we're investing in the future, and somehow magically these children are going to be all right. Whereas what the suggestion is from Prout is we need to start to view children as beings in their own right rather than becomings. And I think for most of you as educators, you would see that notion of treating children as beings, the longer you get to know them, the more complex you see that their personalities are, and that they are fully functioning people. They may not have all the rights, they may not have all the responsibilities that adults do, but they're practicing those things. And I think that what we move to in a quality physical education, or in Australia and New Zealand, a health and physical education program, is seeing children more holistically. So that leads me to think about how's childhood changed. You know, what's going on, and how is it changing, you know, from day to day, and how rapidly it's changed. And you can see there from the little picture of the students online, that is a massive change for children, and most of them don't realise what that change is. For an old guy like me, there was none of that stuff around when I was a kid. I used to spend my childhood, especially in school holidays, out on bikes with my mates, and I would only come home for lunch and for dinner, and that's how my day was consumed. Whereas when you look at the children there, they're doing a lot more things. So you can see that in terms of the Western world, I suppose, and a lot of our economically well-developed societies, we're seeing children as a declining percentage of the population. We're seeing that they live more diversely than we've ever seen before. So that, you know, you look at family structures, and and parents and siblings and the whole array of family structures. We're also seeing that due to the internet and access to the internet, we're seeing that childhood is produced through flows of information across national boundaries. And at the same time, we're seeing that governments are trying to control and regulate childhood. And as that occurs, we're seeing that there's a push gradually, or not gradually, but more extensively, for a focus on individualisation, whether it be in our schools, and we're trying to focus on individuals' learning needs, through to society, and the individualisation that access to IT and electronic media provide. And we're also seeing an increased focus on children's rights and their voice in the community. So, Caballero had this to say, and Mel found this quote, and I thought it was really useful. In order for young people to be efficient individuals within their social context, they have to learn how to be responsible for themselves and for others. So to me, that comes back to something that I'm starting to see in a lot of Spanish sporting teams and in contexts in Spain, where to me that's respect. That's a level of respect for people. So when you hear a great sports person like Rafa talk about his opponent, he says, I need to respect my opponent. My opponent, if I don't respect my opponent, I'm not going to train properly, I won't prepare for the match properly, and that's when I'll lose. So to be a good player, he says, you need to be respectful of your opponent. And that's a really different way, I think, to look at respect from the normal sort of construct of respect that we quite often see in schools when we're talking about, you know, speaking nicely to people and doing all of that sort of thing. There's respect in a
Sorry, Rick, I love that example of Rafa, but for me, I always talk to my students as well about how most jobs these days are not individual. You're not going to walk out of school or university or whatever level you come through and walk into a job where you're working as a lone wolf. That most of the things that we will do in our lives will have social context, either in a family member or as part of an active community or workplace. And you have to be respectful and responsible to yourself, to know your boundaries and how you're going to be consistent in your life, and also how to look out for others and to be respectful of other people's opinions and the life that they're going through as well. And I do think that sometimes with the change in childhood, where we see kids not integrating out into the community or in very organised structural play, or on a screen, as I watch my daughter on her screen right in front of me, on your own, that maybe we need to make sure in our lessons that there is a lot of context for community interaction and collaboration, which needs to be practiced to resolve conflict and to collaborate effectively around a task together.
Thank you for broadening that definition, because I really agree with what you're saying, Mel. I think, you know, when I'm working with young people in schools, across a number of schools, I tend to talk about respect for themselves, for other people in the room, you know, their peers, their teachers, and especially when I'm dealing with a lot of different cultural groups, including Australian Aboriginal children, I talk about respect for your family. And, you know, it's very early on in that lesson that the hand goes up and the kid says, one kid will say, well, they're not here. What do you mean? And I'll say to them, look, if we're in the gym, I want you to imagine that they're standing over there against the wall, and at some time in this lesson, you're going to be making a decision. After you've made that decision and you've behaved in a certain way, when you turn around and look at your parents, will they be smiling or not? And most of the kids go, oh yeah. So that sort of connects them with their family, and I think it also values what they bring to school. They do know right and wrong, you know, and that's quite often defined by their family. Over to you, Mel.
No, I agree. I think sometimes I find it in international schools that the school tends to have a policy, or I think policy is maybe too strong a word. We tend to have a outline about what respect looks like at school, because culturally it might look very differently at home. Collaboration can be very different in PE or in school context, and whereas at home it might be that your parent is the person in charge and you don't say or hear anything. It depends on where people are coming in from as well. So I think what I like about these ideas is that we are trying to set up a norm in our classrooms that allow for this to take place. I think that's so important.
Yeah. Okay. So this quote from Don Hellison, as cited by Peter Hastie, we really liked. So helping students take personal and social responsibility in part means sharing power with students and shifting decision making to them. So teaching personal and social responsibility does not mean getting inside kids' heads, but getting them inside their own heads. So I think if we unpack that a bit, the stuff around sharing power, one of the aspects of Hellison's model is to gradually shift the power from the teacher to the student, to give them greater responsibility, and most importantly, to give them time and opportunities to practice taking those responsibilities. Because just like learning any skill, unless they get lots of practice at it, they're not going to improve, and they most probably need time to do that. So, Mel, do you want to talk about the three big models to start with?
So at the moment, and especially as I go through the Phys Ed Summit conference list, these are the three big areas that have come out, and I think they've really come out in the last few years. There's been a big blanket of information coming out, especially on Twitter and social media, as teachers go through these, and there's more and more resources as well. And there's also a lot of academic reading around these models and how people are using them, and the fidelity of these models as well, which Rick and I have talked about a bit. And they are sports education, the TPSR, which I know Rick is going to discuss a little later, and the game-based approach, one of which TGFU, Teaching Games for Understanding, is one of them. So those are the three big models that people are using, and you might be using them as a standalone model. So you might go through your sports education unit, or you might be hybridizing the models where you're taking a little bit of something from things and melding them as a best fit for your students. So the sport education model, I'm just going to recap them, and I'm sorry if you're very familiar with them, but they might be new to some people, so I'll just do a quick summary. If you're in the presentation, and maybe Colin might have a chance, these two videos will work for you and you can watch them at your leisure. I'm not going to play them now. They go for about 7 to 8 minutes each. And Vicky Goodyear does a really good summary of what is CPEP, or sports education, and then how you can implement it in your classroom on her vlog series. And if you haven't watched any of her vlog series, I highly encourage you to do so. Sports education is where you are running a season of sport, and it's a continuum of a pre-season and then the season and then a post-season type celebration. And when you chat with your kids, you plan the season together. So it might be that you have your students, you sit down and you talk about what sport are you going to play, and they get to determine that based on your school equipment and your space. You might even go through a series of different games together to decide what works best. And then together you have different roles and responsibilities for your students. So when I've done this with my grade 9s, someone took on a coaching responsibility, someone was the captain of the team. I had a media person who was responsible for social media as well as creating promotional videos for the group. We had a sports board, so like the management who was looking after the season of sport and the results. We had referees. So there were a bunch of different roles, and each student has a role, but they are also a player in the team. So they are responsible for playing, but also for being involved in organising a specific part of the competition. So as part of that role, I had the students create their own job specifications, my older students, but for your younger students, you could already prepare that. And there are some great resources online. I know Jared Robinson has some up there as well. And if you go to the CPEP, I think the CPEP website has also got ideas about where to start as well. There are lots of apps you can use, and you can get the kids to discuss those as well. For example, like a refereeing app, so that they don't have to devise score sheets. They can just use apps that are already there. And the idea is that the kids own their season. They prepare a pre-season. You might even have a pre-season tournament or competition to seed the teams. Then you'll have the season of sport where the kids are working their way through. And then at the end of the season, the kids will have some form of celebration. And you are there inquiring and guiding them through that process. But you're primarily there for some answering of questions or giving of information if it's required. But really the students are the ones that own this, and they are the ones making these choices and decisions through the conversations and collaboration in those groups. One of the things that I had is my umpires were responsible for deciding on what rules they were going to play in a modified game that the kids had decided on. And then they had to go through and decide how to officially referee. What signals were they going to use, and they had to teach those to the players, and they had a sports tribunal, so they were able to discuss with the kids what would happen if they didn't follow the rules, and that was all agreed on, so that they were showing respect to the referees, and the referees were respecting the players. And then one of the other jobs I've had for my high school kids, the coaches, they were responsible for assessing the skills of their players. They wrote the rubric for assessment of performance and motor skill and tactical play, and then they were the ones assessing and giving feedback to students throughout the season in connection and talking to the teacher as they went. They had to justify those grades, but basically it was peer assessment for that unit. And then after the season is done and it's completed, the kids are responsible for a post-celebration. It could be an assembly. We've had a party where we've had a guest speaker come in who was a professional volleyballer who talked to the students about what it was to be a professional sports person. And then we had a barbecue, which the kids organised. Last year, the kids organised a pizza party, which they did by a Google form, and the kids all signed up and brought their money and had it all delivered. It was pretty amazing. So this is a fantastic way to get your kids really involved in how they're going to put this unit together, and to have really strong voice and share their opinions, and you'll see them really rise into it. I'm sure you've seen the same thing, Mick.
Yeah, I have. You know, and it's really good, and they get very excited about it. I think one of the great things, and that it's easy to let slip by, is that celebration. And I think that's something that's really different. But it also, what I love about this approach is that it gives kids an opportunity to engage with the culture of the sport and the structures of the sport in the community, which can be quite diverse and quite different. So, yeah, okay. And we'll move on to the next one, Mel.
Yeah, the other model that's really current at the moment is game-based approach, and a lot of people will know teaching games for understanding. I've done a lot of blogging and presenting on teaching games for understanding as well. And again, I've got Vicky Goodyear's vlog up here. It gives a really nice overview of teaching games for understanding from both a practical and an academic viewpoint. So if you're interested in getting more information, please do run that video. PE traditionally is taught through a warm-up activity and then a skill drill session and then straight into games. And what we're finding is that the transfer of ability and information is just not always apparent for kids. They can't put together the skill drill that they've performed and how they're going to apply that in a tactical game where everything is moving rather than static. And there's a lot of things for them to observe and take in and make decisions on. So TGFU really focuses on tactical play initially and then adds skills as a secondary element to it. Students are working through and in games all the time, and they're considering when do I pass or when do I move, where do I move or where do I pass, and then the how comes last. The actual skill of how to pass, how to hold the ball is not the most primary thought here. The key points to consider with TGFU or game sense approach is that the tactical and technical are taught together. It's not separated. So kids are really working on how they need to move and where they need to move and how they're going to be involved in the gameplay. And then they're thinking about perfecting the skill of passing or of hitting the birdie in badminton. Your lesson begins with a game form that is going to lead on to the game that you're going to play. So you're thinking about, as you progress through the lesson, there's a common thread, hopefully, that's coming out in your game form. It's very heavy on questioning and inquiry. So it's a lot of getting the kids to think about what's actually happening and to observe what's happening rather than to be just statically passing a ball or standing still. And the teacher should be driving that inquiry until the kids are ready to drive it themselves. And as they're going through that inquiry, there's lots of feedback from the teacher in real time. So you might be playing your game for 4 or 5 minutes, and then there'll be a minute or two where you're discussing and giving feedback, and then it just rolls on. TGFU, you should be modifying or making changes to suit your learners. Some of the things you might change are the situations. So I'll say to my kids, the score is 19 to 21 and you've got 1 minute left to play. How are you going to get yourself into a winning position? You might change your equipment to modify the equipment to have a bigger ball or a softer ball or a smaller bat or a bigger bat or whatever it is that your kids need to really focus on that tactical inquiry that you're going through. You might change the rules, and the rules can be changed by a team. So this team can have 3 touches on the ball in soccer, and this team can have as many as they like. Or you could change it individually. So in soccer, I find with my really strong players, I'll tell them they can have 2 touches on the ball, whereas everyone else can have as many as they like, so that the kids are really thinking about how they're going to really apply those 2 touches efficiently, rather than just hogging the ball all the way down the pitch. And they really should be thinking about this in play.
Mel, may I ask a few questions about TGFU?
You can.
Yeah, so a common question that I hear from people is related to TGFU is, how long do you make a unit? Do you focus on having shorter units when you do TGFU, or do you focus on having a longer unit?
Depends on the age group, I think. I know that at the elementary at ISB here, they only teach TGFU. They don't play a full game of what we would say just soccer. So the kids are continually doing TGFU in those units. I find for me, like I'm about to go into a grade 8 invasion games unit, and for half of the lessons I'll be doing TGFU, and then the other half I'll do TGFU warm-up and lead-up activities before they play the game, so that they're really thinking about what they're doing, and the unit will run for 16 lessons. I find with my high school kids that they need a little different scaffolding, but I'm still using those models with them, because I think you'll find that by the time you get to high school, some kids have had so many hours of practice at particular sports, and some kids really haven't, that the differential is so great that you have to make things, you have to say to the kids, right now it's not fair because you're really strong and skillful, and this person is really strong at observing and coaching, and we now need to meet in the middle. So we're trying to go for equality, but it's not going to be fair. Otherwise you just have a dominance of some kids over others all the time, and those kids who are very skillful are not being challenged. And so it's about showing them that TGFU is challenging them at their level, and at the same time challenging the less skillful kids at their level. Everyone is being challenged at their own level. We just happen to be playing together.
Mel, I agree with that. I think one of the skills in using a game-based approach is actually how you differentiate the learning across your class. And so one of the things that I do is provide, through the small games, the ability for students to make decisions about the levels upon which they want to be involved in the game. So we may start off a lesson with a very simple game, and then I change the constraints as Mel outlined. They could be rules, it could be the size of the court or the area that they're playing on, it could be the equipment. And I always make sure that I change what I call secondary rules. If you change the primary rules, then the kids don't actually see that it's the sport that they think it was. the other thing that I'd just add to it too, Mel, a lot of people, or some people in Australia now, are starting to go with a whole term where they look at a theme of, say, invasion games or net and court games, or the other two categories, and they might teach use 6 sports across that term, say 10 weeks, 11 weeks, so that students can actually are given opportunities to transfer strategies between sports and think about what strategies they can learn from one sport and they may be able to apply in a different sport. So that notion of transfer and being able to transfer your learning in one sport to another then becomes part of the focus of what we're learning for.
Okay, so Mel, I apologize, but you're muted, so you can unmute yourself.
Sorry, here I am.
No, it's no problem. We have a few other questions. Would you like to go ahead and answer them, or kind of move forward?
Maybe if you can ask people to jump on Twitter, or you could type them in the bottom of the presentation for me. I'll come back if that's okay. I think we need to keep going.
Okay, yes, I'll take care of that for you.
Thanks, mate. Okay, in that case, we'll move on to teaching personal and social responsibility. And when Mel and I began to talk about this presentation, Mel surprised me with her vehemence about this area of personal and social responsibility, most probably being the most, from her point of view, the most important stuff that we teach as physical educators. And to assist us with that, I've gone to Don Hellison's work. He's written a great book that's now out in its 3rd edition, that's being added to not only by himself but also by some of his ex-PhD students, people like Dave Walsh and Paul Wright and those sort of people. And it's got a lot more practical applications and ideas on it. And there's a great website that you can go to there too, the TPSR Alliance website, because they've got all their readings and a whole lot of support materials. And for those of you in the US, you most probably know about that website. It's a really good one. When Hellison developed this model, he started to think about initially about levels, and that there were 5 levels that a student may move through in any particular lesson. Now people are starting to move away from the levels idea and talk about outcomes. And so the 5 outcomes that he asked students to focus on, or you can ask students to focus on in a lesson, at level 1, can you show self-control and respect? Level 2, how can you take responsibility for your actions, and what sort of effort are you putting in? The 3rd one is about caring for others. The 4th is around, I suppose, really picking up on that quite strongly, on that notion of empowerment of the student, and then taking self-direction. And then finally, can you transfer what you've learnt in the phys ed class today to another part of your life and apply it there? So Mel's asked a really good question here that she's got from Ash Casey. What does it take to encourage teachers to adopt a multimodal approach to teaching and learning in phys ed? Mel, do you want to just sort of...
Yeah, I just want to kind of throw this out to our audience. If you think about those big 3 models that are out there at the moment, how many of those are you familiar with? And of those, do you feel... Like for me, I know about 2 of them, and I'm now working really hard on TPSR, but I feel like I already do a lot of personal and social responsibility learning in my classroom, but maybe not under the model heading that Rick is going to outline. But there's a discussion amongst phys ed and academia about whether we should be adopting a multimodal approach and trying to hybridize some of this, but there's concern that we might not do justice to those models. So I'd be interested to hear from people about what they try and whether they are sticking more to one model in its holisticness, or whether they're blending them to see how their learners go, or whether that's just too hard. I don't know if I can get a good answer from people, but I'd be really interested to see what people are doing. So maybe if you can think about that question as Rick moves on through TPSR, we'd love to get your feedback.
Thanks, Mel. Okay, so level 1, like I outlined previously, is around respect and self-control, and what students are expected to do there. And I suppose when I first go in to work with a class, and I don't have classes of my own, I'm quite often just heading into a class doing a demonstration lesson. Sometimes I sense that I'm going to need this Hellison model, and I only introduce a maximum of 2 levels or outcomes to students, otherwise they can be overwhelmed. And these tend to be the outcomes that I think a lot of teachers have talked a lot about to kids, certainly in Australian schools. So, you know, how can you control yourself? And then the notion of that teachers quite often don't agree with each other, but they can resolve their differences in a peaceful manner. So how can we move towards, you know, conflict resolution that's peaceful, that doesn't involve snotting somebody, hitting them hard, or berating them, and how can we do that in a respectful way? So I think that's the first level. The second level is how can you take responsibility for your actions? And some of that to me is around effort. What sort of effort can you put in? And I reflect, you know, in my teaching days, how you had maybe a student in your class who was quite disruptive, and finally they have a good day, and you wander across to them and you say, you know, you're having a really good day. Do you want to show me some of the work you've been doing? And the kid looks up at you with a look of amazement in their eyes and just says, you don't want that too. You don't want work as well. And that's because I've been on about effort. I haven't been on about effort. I've just been on about good behaviour. And so what I like about this model is it provides a number of outcomes for students to work towards and strive towards, and I think enables you to set higher expectations for your students that are beyond just good behaviour. Then we move
Rick,
to level 3.
We've only got about 12 minutes to go, so we're going to have to power on a little.
We will. So level 3 is caring for yourself and for others, and I think that it's really important that we actually teach our students how to care for each other and to think about the well-being of others. And one of those things that I think that we're well placed to teach in a sport or physical education context is the notion of what's good for the team, what's best for the group, and having to sublimate the individual sometimes for the betterment of the club or the group. Level 4 is around self-direction, and self-direction to me is around goal setting. And I often say to teachers, imagine a class where the students, that you walk in and all the students know what they want to learn. They're taking control of their learning and what they want to learn next. And to me, that's the ultimate. That's the class where you start to run ahead and kids are actually starting to design their own learning and their own programs. So in a phys ed class, you know, I really want to learn about this strategy and this aspect, and how does he do it over there and she do it over there? I need to learn that stuff. And then finally, how can you transfer this from the lesson today to another aspect of life? And I love Mel's quote there, because I really do like Andy Warhol and his art. You know, they always say times change things, but you actually have to change them for yourself. All right? So I reckon there are 3 big things that go on here. First of all, you can worry about all these levels and all of that stuff, and if you like, that's a bit more of the content. But Hellison emphasises it's actually about the relationships that you have with your students. That's what's going to make a difference here. And that he believes that physical activity is connected to life. So there are a whole lot of kids going to school, and they don't go to school to learn to read and write and do all of those other subjects. The sole reason for them coming to school is to participate in your phys ed lessons, to play sport, to play games at recess and lunchtime. And he thinks this is a great way to capture those kids and actually teach them other things. And like I mentioned before, there's an emphasis on empowerment. So the big purpose and principles of this is to teach young people to take responsibility for their own well-being and to be sensitive and responsive to the well-being of others. So there are a number of goals that he sets there, and you can see these and these relate to the levels. So these are some of the things that I mentioned previously, and we'll just flick through these. I like this notion in effort about the courage not to give up. And I think it's a bit of a challenge for some of our students. And you look at the teacher values and what we're asking the teacher to do, so that they set self-paced tasks, so that the students have got choice and there's variations that they can choose from, and they have competitive choices. So my advice would be, don't put a highly competitive student with one who's there for social reasons, because they'll just annoy the heck out of each other. The third or fourth thing to do is that notion of self-direction, and we talked about goal setting and kids developing a personal plan of progression, and that requires empowerment. You've got to give away some of your power as a teacher there, and then helping and leadership, that caring capacity, and that notion that I mentioned before of group welfare, and thinking about the well-being of others. And somebody said before, you know, that role modeling. I think here, you role modeling how you're caring for the well-being of others speaks volumes to students in your class. And then going beyond the gym, trying these things out in other areas of your life and becoming a role model yourself. So that notion of values transfer. Once you get to that, then you need some strategies to teach this. And you, as in any lesson, you'll get problems that arise. So Hellison and some of the people writing in these areas are coming up with some ways in which you can, and strategies in which you can deal with this stuff. So there's sort of pre-event negotiations, what ifs. There's an accordion principle, so you can reduce or expand times to sit out. You maybe to play a game. If there's no plan when a student exits the class and they're being timed out, well, then you can't come back in. You're not ready to play. You may hold a sport court where the peers actually decide what could be best. All right. So the other sort of things you can do pre-event.
Oh, sorry, Rick. I think I've doubled my slides up.
You have. You've done well.
Sorry, mate.
All right.
Sorry, mate.
Ah, that's
I'm going
right.
to delete that one while I'm sitting here.
Okay. So there are a whole range of things that you can do there. So we can see some of those then. Another one, a talking bench. So kids can sit out and actually solve the problems, and you actually give them time and space to solve those problems. And I would do the same in game-based approaches. I think one of the best things that you can do is put kids together in groups and give them time to actually talk to each other to solve the problems, rather than saying, oh, the game is the most important thing here, my lesson outcomes are the most important thing here. Slow it up, give the kids time to resolve those issues and to solve them themselves, and as well as an MBA timeout, you know, so that the kids can call a timeout and say, we need to talk, we need to stop the lesson here, this isn't working. Okay, you might have an emergency plan, your what ifs. I like the idea too of try it my way for a week. So you actually challenge the child and you say, yeah, look, I hear what you say and I know that this might be unfair, but can you just try it my way for a week? And then, you know, we'll have a talk about it. And then the fact that, you know, there's an activity or a non-activity option sometimes. So I think that leads us ultimately to, you know, how do we operate in our environment in the school? You know, and I've adapted these from a strategy in Northern Ireland. And I thought it was really interesting that it came from Northern Ireland because they're investing a lot of time and energy in their children and their young people because they're coming out of a society that's been in civil war, and they can see that unless they do that, then the change isn't going to take place. So I think these notions here of using whole child approaches, where we recognise the complexity of kids' lives and we look at their physical, social, emotional, spiritual, as well as intellectual development. And I think we've got a special place in that as phys editors. We need to harness the support of people who are outside the school, you know, the parents, the carers, the teachers, and the communities. We need to develop a culture where we involve children in decisions in matters that affect them. And that term actually comes out of the UN Rights of the Child. We need to use evidence-informed approaches to support the operations and outcomes of what we're doing in our teaching and learning programs. And finally, we need to develop a culture which respects and foregrounds the rights and responsibilities of the child. Okay, so Mel, how are you feeling about that? Would you like to sum up anything or add anything? Because I've been going at 1,000,000 miles an hour there.
You've done very well, mate. You've done very well. I think if I go back to, we asked a question at the beginning about what learning needs to take place and what do people think. And some of the things that came up were people were concerned about conflict resolution or thinking outside the box, creating a safe environment, cooperative learning and collaboration, self-esteem, confidence, and dealing with differences and similarities and inclusiveness. And I think that between these three models that we are really using in PE at the moment, there's really enough open space to deal with those issues that people are sharing about. I think that people need to just take baby steps at a time to decide how they're going to implement that. So I found, though, that the last few schools that I've worked at, they're all about 21st century learning skills, including collaboration and personal and social education. But what I've found is that those things are expected to be explicitly taught by PE teachers. And I think one of the things we need to think about is how we're professionally developing that for teachers so that they are feeling confident to deal with how do I explicitly teach collaboration? How do I explicitly teach leadership in my classroom? How do I explicitly teach kids to be respectful in game time when they're really highly emotional, they've got adrenaline pumping? How do I teach them to sit down and deal with conflict and really teach them to do that, not just expect them to do that? And you see that assessment comes out that way. And I would really love for my kids to be able to know what I'm expecting from them and teach them explicitly how to deal with those things. And I think TPSR would be one way to go about doing that for sure.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah, I think, you know, it provides a structure and it's not a program, so there's plenty of flexibility in it for you. And I think, you know, just start small, have a play around with it, and talk to others. And certainly, you know, Mel and I are available at any time should people want to talk, you know, especially on Twitter and things like that. You now have our Twitter handles, and we'd love to hear from you and hear what your ideas are. And if you're in the Asia Pacific area, around Australia, New Zealand and that area, you might want to come to the ACHPA 2017 conference in Canberra in January. We're actually having 4 symposia.
Lost you, Rick.
Sorry?
I think we lost the back of you there. I did.
Ah, right. So there are 4 symposia. One of them's on TPSR.
Perfect.
Okay.
And I think, can we finish up by just thanking everyone who was involved today? I'd like to particularly thank phys ed Summit people, Colin, who's up really late and really tired, and he's done such a great job moderating. I think it would be also awesome to just thank you, Rick, for your time, and thanks to our families for giving us up for a couple of hours today. And thank you so much to those people who've taken the time to tune in and to share their ideas and their thoughts with us and their questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Mel. You've done a brilliant job too. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. Thank you to you as well.
Yep. And,
Okay.
to add more thank yous, thanks to both of you. I really appreciate your time today and your expertise. And I do want to remind everyone that was speaking on the TOSL and was really engaged. We appreciate that. And also, Mel is unable to access the conversation. So now that you have Mel's Twitter handle, if you'd like to speak to her specifically, that would be a great way to do so. So just wanted to remind everyone that. So thanks so much for joining us, everybody.
Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Colin.
Thanks,
Have a
Colin.
great rest of your day, mate.
All right.